I'm curious, or I'd like to hear you comment on a little bit on this OM45, certainly one of the most special instruments we've ever had. It seems like it's a work of perfection or near perfection. I wonder if you want to just point out, some of the pieces that, the areas of the guitar that are special, materials, or the way the work goes.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, design-wise, we've tried to be, sort of relatively true to the, to the pre-war OM45 without being a slavish copy. We do a few of our things, our own way, just to make them look a little bit different.
So it's very traditional and
inspired by
a true story.
Yeah, exactly. The fretboard inlay is the biggest example that
your take on it rather than a
copy of any fretboard inlay,
which I really like a lot about it.
But very much so in the style of the traditional. The most obvious thing that sort of makes it an over-the-top kind of guitar is the amount of abalone inlay.
Compared to a 42 style
42
guitar,
style, a 41
fancy.
style, it has 40. So basically the top itself would be similar to a 42.
Mm-hmm.
But on top of the top inlay, we also have abalone around the sides and around the back and
down
up the back. Down the center. So that much is more than, that triples the amount of
so much more
figure.
hand labor, and it's all done with such care. Every corner.
Well, everything has to match. There are no gaps in the, in the abalone. It's all heart shell abalone as opposed to the planar. It's the more
so super small detail.
Well, it's when you cut up the abalone shell, there are various grades of abalone, and this is the top grade, which is only a small amount of each shell. On top of 3 times as much abalone as a style 41,
Literally 3 times as much, yeah.
Or 42 rather. We also have the strip around here, which is a whole separate inlay. The neck has to be fit before the inlay is put in. The neck has to be shaped. It has to be fit. You have to basically finish the neck and then do the inlay.
And you can see everything's a super, super tight tolerance.
And everything miters here. There are black-white lines on either side, black lines on either side of the abalone. And, well, just to finish the narrative,
yeah.
We've repeated the section, sort of like the idea of running the abalone around the tailpiece. Although in this case, it's actually run all the way around it. This is the trickiest single part of the inlay to do, because this piece has to fit in perfectly.
Yeah, and that's one of my favorite parts of the guitar to look at. There's always more little details in the way of the craftsmanship, but that whole section right there is just a beautiful work of art.
A lot of this has to be fit first and then taken out, and then more of the routing done, and then fit back in and adjusted. So it's back and forth. It isn't, it's not as if like when you're inlaying,
it's not like inlaying neck.
Yeah, you make a pocket. You make a pocket in the hole and the inlay, and you just drop it in. The other thing that's interesting, the way we do it, I've talked with a lot of luthiers about, you get together, you talk shop, how do you actually go about, what's the order that these things end up getting, put in. What we actually do is we make the corners first. We inlay the corners first, and then we inlay the strips in between. And we do the same thing here. The corners, we first do...
The corners look like the toughest part, really.
They are. Instead of like making strips and then getting to a corner and then actually having to make that joint, we make the corner first, and then we connect the strips between the corners here, and then we connect the long strips between the corners that have been done here. And there's a lot of trial and error in figuring out. We kind of now have a pretty good process for, you know, for doing a 45 style inlaid body, but it's taken a little bit of trial and error
to get the process.
And it's not just efficiency that we're after. We're after a method that gives us the greatest degree of accuracy for mitering, you know, all of the lines and mitering all of the corners.
Yeah, and your accuracy is good or better, really better than almost anybody else I've ever seen, anybody else's guitars. They're just, you can't overstate how clean and perfect the appearance is of this.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you. We're going to give a little shout out to Todd Owens, who is the guy who actually, the craftsman, who is our specialist in putting in the body inlay.
So Todd did that?
Todd did that, yeah.
Cool, yeah. Great.
Well, on top of all of the inlay, we set aside our very best Brazilian rosewood.
That's what I was going to ask you about,
the
basic stash of wood that you save for these kind of guitars.
Yeah, when Brazilian rosewood is harder and harder to find all the time, although, you know, we may have stumbled on another nice stash, which, stay tuned, I'll tell you more about.
Luck working for you.
But whenever the wood comes in, we go through it first and say, okay, this goes in the special stash. Doesn't necessarily have to be a 45, but it's got to be a special guitar.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a luthier's choice or a 45, or we might just say, you know, we're going to reserve this for a NAMM showpiece guitar. This particular set has the classic spiderweb black lines, which are harder and harder to find these days. It is quarter sawn. The sides actually match, which isn't always the case with Brazilian rosewood.
These days.
And it has, you'd have to get right up in it, but in these areas here, and somewhere, mostly down in this area, there's like the finest curl, like a curly,
Little,
yeah, we call it frog's hair curl.
Well, I remember also when we were here selecting the wood for this guitar, you had several pieces out, and we went through them, and you tapped through them, and this is one that seemed to have just a beautiful wood sound before it was even in a guitar.
Yeah, and you can tell an awful lot about the wood when you're tapping it in the raw stage. We do that a lot.
And you did the same thing with the top.
This is a set of Adirondack, which, you know, I sort of looked at it and thought, well, this could be Italian spruce. The grain is so close, and
So
it's
clean,
so white and so clean.
No cloudiness to it
Yeah,
at all.
it's a very special set of Adirondack. We got a few flitches from this one, a few sets from this one source. We've been hoarding them, and I think we may have one more set left.
Yeah, when I heard it by itself, it was great. And in the so this guitar, before you get into any of the inlay work and all of the special crafts, the basic material, the woods, the Addy top and the Brazilian rosewood, make this guitar sound over the top great. And then you start adding all the other crafts type things to it.
So I don't know. That's a quick and dirty run through. We obviously pay special attention when we're voicing. Sort of, you know, the idea with any OM is to get a good string to string balance, you know, and note to note balance.
It's very even, and of course, I'll just play with it. Still rings forever.
With a little bit of reverb. That's the Brazilian rosewood.
It hasn't dropped at all yet. It's just starting to drop now, so it's just sings. So great wood, and then the beautiful beautiful inlay work as well. Your background before you started your own company is that you had a fairly extensive experience working at one of the more traditional companies and dealing with some of the old timers that really clued you in about what was going on, and you've seen tons of the original OM 45s. Your background on this is such that you really have an idea of the tradition as well as being able to bring your own touch to it. Do you want to talk about your background a little bit in terms of?
Yeah, I did throughout the '80s. I did quite a bit of restoration, mostly of pre-war Martin. Some pre-war Gibson instruments. They weren't considered as valuable back then. They certainly are. They've certainly gained in recognition these days. But so the bulk of the nice stuff that we worked on, was Martin's.
Martin-y stuff.
Yeah. You mentioned I've seen a lot of pre-war. There aren't a lot of pre-war OM 45s. Flat out, not a lot of them. I've seen a handful, and every time you get to repair is very intimate, or restoration is a very intimate process. Oftentimes it takes months, to get through to do the kinds of things because you can't just blast your way through.
You can't plow through. You got to wait, ponder it.
Yeah, you've got to make sure that this detail is right before you can get to the next detail, oftentimes, or you've got to figure out how to do the next kind of thing. So you can spend a lot of time with an instrument and certainly pick up its vibe. You get to study it. It's much more so than seeing a guitar in a music store or whatever. Obviously owning a guitar. And I've owned a number of vintage guitars, no 45s.
When you look at some of those old guitars and you're doing a repair, did you ever say to yourself, boy, why did they do it that way?
Oh yeah. I mean, a lot of things,
you can kind of incrementally improve.
Have informed my way of building. The other part is there's a certain way that an older instrument sounds. You can build an exact, perfect copy, same woods today, and it's not going to sound like that, 80-year-old guitar. So if you want to get closer to that, you actually have to consciously do some different things.
To get it back to that sound.
Or to get closer to the way it sounds now. It's a moving target kind of deal. So I thought a lot about that and have made a lot of, little experiments over the years that have sort of added up. And there's still no way you can make a clone of a 80-year-old instrument, but the objective is to get closer than what you would think of as the sound of a new instrument.
Yeah, and your instruments do sound classic, and you use different materials. You use your age-tone woods. You use
in this one we use age-tone torrefied woods on the bracing.
The bracing as well.
And we certainly, and the Brazilian rosewood is certainly old. In order to be used legally, the wood had to have been harvested prior to 1992. So this is pre-CITES Brazilian rosewood. And
what's one thing you would do to make a new guitar sound old without having to wait 80 years besides the material? Is it a matter of shaving the bracing differently, or?
Yeah, we've changed the bracing in a number of minor, but they add up to significant ways, versus making an exact copy of the bracing from that period. Incrementally, I get an idea of. The bracing has to do two things. It's got to keep your top.
Stiff enough.
It has to keep it dimensionally stable, number one, but it also has to be able to vibrate in a way that, gives you that balanced tone and some projection and a little bit of character that you're looking for. If you think of the way I like to say, if you think of the way a string vibrates, okay, you hit a bass string and it's slow wobble and a large area of displacement, okay, and then if you look at a high note up here, you can barely see it move, and it's a very fast vibration. Mm-hmm. So think of it, you want your top to do that same kind of thing. Because the strings drive the top, and the top vibrates in ways that drives the air cavity, mm-hmm. and the disturbances in the air is what you hear is the music. So the top's got to be able to vibrate in that kind of way and that kind of way at the same time. It's like a coaxial speaker, So how do you make it do that? Well, part of it is the layout and the shaping and the stiffness of the bracing. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And without going into all of the little things, that add up, because some of it's is a bit mysterious even after you've done it for 40 years. Sometimes you can say, okay, I'm going to change the location of these lower braces, the tone bars, we're called the tone bars, or I'm going to change their height a little bit because I don't think the top is actually vibrating the way I want it to. Now maybe it will be in 80 years, but I don't got 80 years.
You don't got 80 years. And that's
So I want it to vibrate more like those older tops. So these little changes have added up over the years.
And you don't have to, you can already be at a somewhat of an advanced age in life and buy one of your guitars, not have to wait 80 years.
Well, again, I don't claim that they sound 80 years old, but what I'm saying, but what I'm trying to do is shave quite a bit of the break-in time off a guitar.
Well, yeah, and it's about satisfaction for the player. Mm-hmm. If someone doesn't necessarily require something that's super old to play, but you do want to hear a certain kind of magic, you want an experience from the guitar, and that's the thing classic guitars give you, and I think your guitars do as well. I just have a different question altogether.
Sure.
You have how many guitars, different shapes, models in your line right now?
Yikes.
15? 20?
16, I think.
16, is that with or without cutaway? Or
That does not include cutaway.
Does not include cutaway.
So the thing I've been impressed with as I go through the shop and see the different models being produced is that they didn't just come out of thin air. It seems like every single model that you produce is one that you've really carefully put thought into and designed. Different bridge plates. Every one of your models is really a unique Bourgeois design. How long did it take you how did you come up with so many different models that are also very specific in their function and design?
Well, I mean, a lot of them are, they're based on traditional models, like the OM mm-hmm. is based on a traditional model, the dreadnoughts, the slope-shouldered dreadnoughts, and so I've started with sort of what I consider the classics, mm-hmm. and then, or the classics that appeal to me. Some people might consider, I don't know, some model that we don't make, a classic. So we've started with the classic models that appeal to us, and then you kind of look at it and say, well, we really probably need to have another medium-sized guitar here, and so what do we want to build next? So a lot of that takes kind of, we think about it for years until we're kind of ready to...
You say the guitar doesn't just pop out. It's
it's been planned for a long time, or it could be like we don't have enough 12-fret guitars. We don't have any small 12-fret guitars in our lineup. The guys in the shop literally put the coupe together as a sort of a combination of a certain neck that we already had and a double O body that we already had. And actually, no, the neck had to be altered a little bit.
Changed up a little bit. Well,
and then we had to figure out the bracing because it was a unique kind of guitar. Because each one is unique.
This isn't like the Banjo Killer, for an example, that it's got... Is that the only guitar in the line that has a Brazilian rosewood bridge plate And
Yes.
how did you decide on that guitar? It had each one of your models seemed to have those specific decisions that were made about it.
Well, back in the day, they were all Brazilian rosewood, and then, as you know, there are certain fads. We were talking about, animal protein glue now is a fad. I say it's a fad in the sense that everyone seems to be asking for it, kind of thing.
Trend.
So a trend, and back in the 90s, the whole idea of a maple bridge plate became very trendy. So we ended up offering a maple as an option, and then, eventually everyone was ordering maple bridge plates on dreadnoughts, OMs, that sort of thing. We left it on the Banjo Killer because, sort of Brian Sutton sort of made that particular model, kind of gave it a personality, and we decided we're going to keep it the way we made it. And so it's the only one left that's standard with a Brazilian bridge plate.
Interesting. Well, it's a great sound guitar, and that must help it a little bit in some way.
It all adds up. It's all a big soup. I like to say that the three things that really make a difference are the design of the guitar. Is it an OM? Is it a dreadnought? What's the size of the air cavity versus the top surface versus the string length? And then
the last part.
So that's one part right there. The second part is the wood, the actual pieces of wood. A Brazilian rosewood guitar sounds different from a mahogany guitar. The tops, is it torrefied? Is it Sitka? Is it a redwood top? All of those, and the very specific pieces of wood. Is it a really stiff one? That sort of thing. And then the third thing is the decisions that the maker makes along the way.
So you come in.
That's the voicing part. And that's also the wood selecting part. So those three things add up to, I like to say, 75% of the sound of the guitar. If you think of everything else, to me, it adds up to 25%. Everything you can possibly think of.
All the little stuff.
And so what exactly, is if it's hide glue, okay, or animal protein glue, what percentage of the sound of the guitar do you attribute to that? Well, it can't be much. Or the finish. It's how you apply the finish. That's the luthier's choice part of it, the luthier's decision, how the finish is applied.
Well, certainly your decisions are clearly good ones, and each one of your different models has been very well thought out and seems to have a real story behind it. That's one of the things I find impressive about your line. You don't just have quantity for quantity's sake. Each guitar really has a niche and a heritage to it.
Well, thank you. It's good that it's ended up that way. And we're probably not done yet.
It's ended up yet.